My husband's funeral. His mistress stood up and said, "He never loved her." The crowd gasped. I said nothing until the lawyer handed her a box and said, "He left this just for you." She opened it and started screaming. At my husband's funeral, the woman he was cheating on me with stood up in the middle of the service, turned to the crowd and said, "He never loved her." She meant me. Her voice echoed across the church like she had every right to be there. Her words hung in the air heavy and sharp like a slap I wasn't allowed to react to. The room fell silent. People turned to look at me, some with pity, some in shock, some just waiting to see what I do. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there staring at the woman who had stolen my husband's heart, or at least whatever was left of it. My son's hand was in mine. My mother's grip tightened around my shoulder. My whole body wanted to explode, but I stayed still. Because what I knew, what she didn't, was that the story wasn't over. A few seconds later, our family lawyer, Mr. Roland Tate, walked calmly to the front of the room. He held a small wooden box in both hands. Everyone watched him, unsure if this was part of the service or some kind of last-minute announcement. He turned to her, the mistress, and said without hesitation, "He left this just for you." She took the box from him like it was a gift, like she'd won something. She opened it, and then she screamed. Before the funeral, I didn't cry. I couldn't. Not for him, not yet. Julian had been dead for 6 days. A car accident, rain-slicked road. Late at night. They said it was instant, but those details didn't matter to me. What mattered was the silence that followed. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, just heavy. I remember the morning of the funeral vividly. The smell of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. The way my mother kept adjusting her pearls, like it gave her something to hold on to. The sound of Caleb, my 10-year-old son, zipping up his tiny black jacket trying to act like this was just another grown-up event. Like he didn't know his world had cracked in half. "You look beautiful," my mom said softly as she fastened a silver pin to my coat, like a widow should. I didn't respond. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself, hair pinned back, makeup hiding the circles under my eyes, lips painted in the same shade I wore on our wedding day. It felt like a cruel joke, how I had once worn this same color with hope in my heart, and now wore it like armor. The ride to the church was quiet. I sat between my mother and Caleb in the back seat of her old Buick. He clutched my hand the whole way, but I could feel his questions buzzing beneath the surface. He hadn't asked about the accident since the day it happened. He just kept asking if Dad had really loved him. That was the part that hurt the most. When we arrived, the first thing I noticed was how full the church was. I didn't expect that many people. I wondered how many of them really knew Julian, the real Julian. The man I'd loved, yes, but also the man who had lied to me, who had smiled while erasing pieces of me behind my back. Most of them came in carrying casseroles and sympathy, but some brought whispers and sideways glances. We were seated at the front next to the flowers I'd picked out days earlier, lilies and white roses. He hated them. But I didn't care. The service was for him, yes, but it was also mine. My moment to say goodbye, even if I didn't know what I was saying goodbye to, the man he was or the man I thought he was. As the organ played, I scanned the room. Friends, family, colleagues, even a few of Julian's old high school buddies I hadn't seen in years. But then I saw her. She was near the back at first, standing under the archway like she was deciding whether to enter, slender, overdressed in a red dress that shimmered every time she moved. She stood out like a warning flare in a sea of black and gray. Delilah Hart. I didn't need an introduction. I had seen her name before. On receipts, on hotel invoices, on a necklace he had bought one Christmas when I got a sweater. And now, she was here. I leaned toward my mother and whispered, "She came." My mom didn't ask who. She didn't have to. Her lips tightened, and she reached for my hand. Delilah walked down the aisle slowly, deliberately, like she owned her place in this story. Her eyes met mine for a split second. There was no shame in them, just entitlement, like she was here to collect something. I could feel Caleb watching her too, confused, unsure why his mom suddenly stiffened beside him. I smoothed his hair, kissed the top of his head and whispered, "Just listen to the nice things people say about Daddy." He nodded, still too young to understand the lies adults tell at funerals. When the pastor began to speak, I stared at Julian's photograph on the altar. It was the one I had chosen, the one where he looked happiest. I remember taking it. We were in Savannah on a family trip just after Caleb was born. Julian had been laughing at something Caleb did, or maybe pretending to. I stared at that photo and tried to remember what it felt like to love him without doubt. I tried to feel something clean, something warm, but all I could feel was the betrayal beneath the grief. And as Delilah sat just a few rows behind me, crossing her legs and flicking her hair like she was waiting for a spotlight, I realized something. Today wasn't going to be about closure. It was going to be about truth and pain, and maybe, if I was lucky, freedom. The pastor was mid-sentence when she rose. Delilah Hart, wearing red like it was a celebration, stood up in the center of the crowded church and turned toward the front with the kind of calm that always comes before a storm. Her heels clicked once against the wooden floor as she stepped forward. People turned in their seats. A few whispered her name. Some had seen her before, maybe at Julian's work events or out in public. Others didn't know her at all but could feel that something was off, a tension thick enough to taste. The pastor paused, confused. He looked to me for direction, unsure if this was some kind of planned tribute. I gave him nothing. Delilah didn't wait for permission. She turned to face the pews and lifted her chin. "I know some of you don't know me," she said, loud enough for every corner of the sanctuary to hear. "But I knew Julian better than most of you ever could." People shifted in their seats. My mother leaned in and hissed. "We should stop this." "No," I said. "Let her talk." Because I wanted to hear what story she'd built for herself. I wanted to know how far she'd go to rewrite the truth. Delilah placed one hand on her chest and said, "I was in his life for 5 years. 5. And not in secret. He told me everything. How unhappy he was. How trapped he felt. How he couldn't be who he really was at home." Some people gasped. Others avoided looking at me. Delilah's voice wavered like she thought she was the one grieving. "He told me he only stayed because of his son," she added, "not because he loved her." She looked straight at me when she said it. There was no apology in her eyes, just triumph, like she believed she had won. I didn't flinch, but inside, I was burning. Caleb tugged at my hand. "Mommy, why is that lady saying that?" He whispered. I squeezed his hand. "Ignore her, baby." The room fell into an eerie stillness. No one knew what to do. The pastor tried to step in. "Ma'am, this really isn't," but before he could finish, a voice from the far side of the room cut through the air. "Miss Hart," said Roland Tate, our family lawyer, as he stood and began walking slowly down the aisle. All eyes turned to him. He held a small wooden box in his hands, polished, plain, almost like a jewelry case, but heavier, denser. Delilah froze. Her expression shifted slightly, confused, then curious. Mr. Tate approached the front, stopped just before the pulpit, and turned toward her. Julian left very specific instructions in his will. He said calmly, "He requested this be delivered to you today publicly." Delilah blinked. Her arms dropped to her sides. She looked unsure for the first time since she walked in. But she took the box slowly, like someone receiving an award. I watched her fingers trace the edge of the lid. Her nails were painted the same wine red as her dress. In that moment, the church was silent again, not in mourning but in anticipation, a quiet kind of suspense that wrapped itself around everyone in the room. People leaned forward in their seats. My mother sat rigid beside me. Caleb was still. Even the pastor stood back, watching. Delilah glanced at me one last time, smug and steady, then opened the box. What she expected? I'll never know. A letter, maybe? A ring. Some last profession of love. But what she got was something else entirely. Her eyes landed on it, and she went pale. Her mouth opened slightly as if trying to speak, but no words came out. Then all at once, she snapped the lid shut and let out a scream that shattered the air. A raw, guttural sound, more than just shock. It was rage, hurt, humiliation. She dropped the box on the floor, backed away like it had burned her, and stumbled down the aisle. Gasps followed her exit. The door slammed behind her with a violent echo that seemed to shake the windows. The box sat at the front, untouched. Mr. Tate turned to me briefly, then nodded. A small private signal. I didn't look at it. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside. Julian had planned this. He'd betrayed me while he lived, but in death, he'd written one final truth, one she couldn't escape, and one I didn't need to say a single word to deliver. The night before the funeral, I sat at my kitchen table with Mr. Tate, the lawyer Julian had trusted for years. The house was quiet, except for the refrigerator and the clock ticking on the wall. Caleb was asleep upstairs. My mother was in the guest room saying the rosary for the third time that day. Mr. Tate opened Julian's will and slid it across the table. I didn't reach for it. "There's something unusual," he said, a clause Julian added shortly before he died. "He left a box for someone named Delilah Hart. Do you know who that is?" I laughed before I meant to, not out of humor, more like disbelief. "Oh, I know who she is." He looked at me carefully, trying to gauge whether I was okay. I wasn't, but I'd stopped expecting to be. I leaned forward. "What's in the box?" Mr. Tate hesitated. "A photograph and a message, handwritten, sealed in the box. He asked that it be delivered during the service publicly. He was very specific." I stared at the wood grain on the table, thinking about how this man, my husband, had crafted one final performance, even in death. One last piece of control, one final message. He really wanted her to see it in front of everyone? I asked. Mr. Tate nodded. His exact words were, "I want her to hear the truth where she can't twist it." A part of me felt sick. Another part felt something like vindication. I looked up at Mr. Tate. "Then do it." He looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "No," I said. "But do it anyway." I had spent so much of my life biting my tongue, preserving peace for the sake of appearances, for the sake of my son. But peace built on silence is just a lie in slow motion, and I was done lying even if I had to let Julian tell the truth through the ashes he left behind. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything I had sacrificed to be his wife. I had bent myself backwards to be enough. I had blamed myself for the distance between us. I'd wondered what I lacked that drove him into someone else's arms, but the truth wasn't in me. It was in him, in his choices, in the way he used charm like a currency and loyalty like a leash. By morning, I had made my decision. I wouldn't confront Delilah. I wouldn't lash out or make a scene. I'd let her speak if she wanted to. Let her stand in front of everyone and spin whatever fantasy she needed to believe because I knew what was coming. I dressed deliberately that day, not for him, for myself. I wore the black suit he never liked. The one he said made me look too serious. I wore the heels I hadn't touched since my job interview 5 years ago. I pulled my hair back tight and put on the lipstick I used to wear when I still believed he loved me. I wanted to look like someone who had already survived the worst. At the church, when Delilah walked in like she belonged there, I didn't flinch. When she stood up and declared that Julian never loved me, I didn't speak. Not because I was afraid, but because I was done fighting ghosts with my voice. Let her talk, I thought. Let her strut and smile and believe she held the upper hand. Let her believe she was the secret he kept closest to his heart, because I knew what was in that box. Julian's truth wasn't kind. It wasn't noble or redemptive. It was cruel in its honesty. The note he left for her was short, only a sentence, but it was enough to unravel everything she thought they had. Mr. Tate had shown it to me. I had read it once, and only once. To Delilah, "For the years I stole from both of you, I never loved you. I only needed you to feel wanted when I didn't deserve to be." He hadn't written me a letter. No apology. No explanation. Maybe that was his final insult, or his quiet acknowledgement that he owed me more than words could ever repay. Either way, I didn't need anything from him anymore. I gave Mr. Tate the green light. Let her open the box. Let the truth be loud for once. Because sometimes, silence is powerful. And sometimes, letting someone expose themselves is more satisfying than any revenge you could ever plan. The air inside the church felt different the moment she touched the lid. It wasn't just quiet. It was expectant. Like the entire room knew something was coming, but didn't know what. I could feel eyes bouncing between me, Delilah, and the box in her hands. Caleb was tucked close to my side. My mother hadn't moved an inch since the lawyer stepped forward. Delilah stood at the front, framed by white lilies, and the picture of my husband smiling at a life he'd already ruined. She held the wooden box delicately like it was something sacred. I wondered if she thought there'd be a ring inside, or a letter telling her he had always loved her. Maybe she believed he'd left me behind in death the same way she thought he'd left me in life. But Julian wasn't that clean. He was messy, and his truth was always heavier than his lies. She unlatched the box slowly, like she wanted to savor the moment. Then she saw it. At first, she didn't react. She just stared inside. Her fingers hovered over the contents, frozen. Her face didn't change. No tearful smile, no sudden gasp, just stillness, as if her brain refused to believe what her eyes were seeing. Then it cracked. Her mouth parted. Her eyes widened. She pulled out a single photograph. It was a candid shot. Her and Julian smiling on a beach, arms wrapped around each other. I'd never seen it before, but I knew right away it wasn't one of their hidden rendezvous. It was something she must have taken proudly, believing it meant more than it did. She turned it over. That's when she made the sound. Not a gasp, not a sob. A scream. One sharp broken sound that pierced the entire room. The kind of scream you make when a lie you've built your life around collapses in one breath. She dropped the photograph and stumbled backward. Her heels wobbled. The box hit the ground, the lid swinging open. She looked at me, her eyes full of fury, confusion, and heartbreak, but I didn't move. Mr. Tate stepped forward and picked up the fallen photograph, careful not to speak. A woman in the second row stood and said, "What's going on?" Delilah turned, face flushed, chest heaving. He lied to me. He told me he loved me. He said he was leaving her. Whispers erupted across the pews. Some people shook their heads. Some leaned closer together, murmuring like gossip carried more weight than grief. She clutched her chest, looking for someone, anyone, to save her from the embarrassment crawling across her skin. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was exposed, her entire identity, her role in Julian's life, unraveling in front of strangers. Then she did something I didn't expect. She walked toward me. 1 step, 2, then 3. Her eyes locked on mine, wild and trembling. I stood up slowly, placing Caleb behind me and resting my hand on the pew. "Why?" she asked. Her voice cracked like glass underfoot. Why would he do this to me? I looked at her for what felt like a full minute. Then I said, clearly and without emotion, "Because he did it to me first." And then I sat back down. She didn't reply. She just stood there blinking like she'd been slapped. Her arms dropped to her sides, and she turned to leave. Her heels echoed louder this time. Not sharp, not proud, just uneven and uncertain. She shoved the church doors open and vanished into the sunlight. Everyone stared. Some at the door, some at the box, and a few at me. I didn't give them anything. No tears, no smirk, no whispered, "I told you so." I had nothing left to prove. Julian's voice was never heard that day, but his message rang louder than any eulogy. He left her with nothing but the truth, and in doing so, finally gave me the only thing he never could while alive, clarity. After the funeral, I didn't go to the reception. I let the guests file out, their eyes heavy with things they weren't brave enough to say. They gave me soft nods, weak smiles, quick hugs. A few offered shallow condolences about how grief can make people act strange, pretending they hadn't just witnessed a woman get emotionally undressed in public. Let them talk. I walked Caleb out to the car. He was quiet, clutching the little wooden cross the funeral home had handed out. When we got inside, he finally spoke. "Mom, who was that lady?" I didn't lie. "She was someone your dad knew," I said. "Someone who thought she was important to him." He looked out the window for a few seconds, then asked, "Did she hurt you?" Paused, considering the question. How do you explain betrayal to a 10-year-old without making them feel like they came from something broken? "She didn't hurt me," I said finally. "He did. But I'm not going to carry that forever, and neither are you." He nodded like he understood more than I gave him credit for, then leaned against my arm as we drove home. That night, the house felt different, not because it was quieter. Julian hadn't exactly filled it with laughter near the end, but because for the first time, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was space. It was mine. I walked into our bedroom. No, my bedroom now. I stood at the doorway taking in the bed we used to share, the nightstand he never cleaned, the drawer where I'd found the receipts that started the unraveling. It didn't feel like a war zone anymore, just a room. I opened the closet and took out the last suit he wore, the one from our anniversary dinner a year before he died. I ran my fingers along the lapel, trying to remember what it felt like to love him without questioning every word, every late-night phone call, every distant look. That version of him existed once, but loving someone isn't the same as knowing them. And I didn't really know Julian, not until it was too late. I laid the suit on the bed, folded it neatly, and placed it in a donation box. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need any of it. The next morning, I made pancakes for Caleb. I played music while we ate. He laughed for the first time in weeks, and I realized something. I wasn't mourning Julian anymore. I was mourning myself. The version of me that believed love had to be earned, that loyalty meant silence. That strength was measured by how much pain you could endure without flinching. But that version of me was gone. I'm not angry at Delilah, not anymore. I think she loved him in her own way. Or maybe she just loved being chosen the way I once did. But love built on lies isn't love at all. It's survival, and I'm done surviving. I want to live. Julian thought the truth would hurt her, and it did. But it freed me. And maybe in the most twisted way, that was his final gift. People always say funerals are for the living, not the dead. I used to think that meant closure. Now, I think it means choice. You get to choose what kind of person you'll be. When the worst parts of your story are over, you get to decide whether the pain becomes your prison or your turning point. I chose the latter. As I stood by the window that morning, coffee in hand, watching Caleb chase the dog in the backyard, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not an apology, not answers, not someone to save me from the grief. I had saved myself. If this story moved you or made you think about love, betrayal, or strength in a different way, share it. Someone else might need to hear it too. Let me know in the comments what you would have done in my place. Would you have stayed silent, or would you have said something that day? And if you want more real stories that cut deep about heartbreak, healing, and everything in between, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button if this one hit you, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for listening to my truth. I'll see you in the next one. My sister slapped me at her engagement party because I accidentally splashed juice on her expensive dress. My parents sided with her, and now they don't understand why I cut off with them, and the wedding is canceled. My name is Amber, and I've never been one to draw attention to myself. At 25, I work as a manager at a travel company where I've been for the past 3 years. My apartment is small but comfortable, just a short walk from the office. Every day follows the same peaceful routine. I wake up, go to work, return home, occasionally meet up with friends, and spend my weekends visiting my parents. Some might call my life boring, but I prefer to think of it as structured. Large crowds make me uncomfortable, and you'll never find me at wild parties or social gatherings. I like my quiet corner of the world. Thank you very much. My sister Sarah, though, she's a different story entirely. Ever since we were kids, she's been the family spotlight. While I was hiding in the back row of school assemblies, she was front and center, starring in every theater production. When I was quietly doing my homework, she was running for class president, and winning, of course. Sarah, darling, you were amazing in the school play. Mom would gush, then turn to me with that familiar look of disappointment. Amber, why don't you try out next time? It would be good for you to get involved like your sister. I'd just shrug and retreat to my room, knowing they'd never understand that I was perfectly content being myself. But the comparisons never stopped. Every achievement of mine stood in Sarah's shadow, measured against her flashier successes. When we got to college, Sarah took it to another level. While technically studying to become a teacher, she started modeling on the side. By our second year, she was walking runways and appearing in local fashion magazines. After graduation, she didn't even bother with teaching. The modeling career had already taken off. Then she met Marcus at one of her fashion shows. Rich family, expensive car, designer everything, the whole package. Suddenly, our family dinners turned into the Sarah and Marcus show. You won't believe what Marcus got me, became her weekly opening line. One Sunday it was a diamond necklace, the next a new iPhone, then a designer handbag that cost more than my monthly rent. Oh, and his family has the most amazing summer house. She'd gush, while Mom and Dad hung on every word. They're taking me there next weekend. His mother comes from old money, you know. I sat quietly through these performances, pushing peas around my plate and trying to fade into the background. Last week, I got my first promotion at work, senior manager, with a nice raise and everything. I tried to share the news one time, but they always preferred to hear about Sarah's successes rather than mine. Another Saturday rolled around, and I found myself walking up the familiar path to my parents' house. The morning air was crisp, and I could hear excited squealing coming from inside. Before I could even get my key in the lock, the front door flew open. Sarah burst out of the kitchen like a whirlwind, her face flushed with excitement. She was practically bouncing as she thrust her left hand in front of my face. There it was, a massive diamond ring that caught the light and scattered it across the walls. "He proposed," she shrieked, twirling around. "Marcus asked me to marry him." Mom and Dad emerged from the kitchen right behind her, both beaming. Mom was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, mascara slightly smudged from happy tears. Dad had his arm around her shoulders, looking like he might burst with pride. "We're having the engagement party right here, Sarah," barely taking a breath. "Marcus's parents are coming, and all their relatives, and it's going to be absolutely perfect." "Congratulations," I said, genuinely happy for her. "That's wonderful news." But she was already moving on, pacing the living room with her phone in hand. "We need to make lists. The venue is settled here, obviously, but we need to figure out the guest list. This needs to be impressive." Mom jumped right in. "What about Uncle Robert? He has that successful law firm now." "Yes, perfect." Sarah nodded vigorously. "And Cousin Emily, she's that cardiac surgeon in Boston. Oh, and Professor James, you know, Dad's brother who heads the chemistry department." They huddled around the coffee table, scribbling names on a notepad. I stood awkwardly by the door, still holding my purse, feeling like a piece of furniture they were working around. "What about Aunt Martha?" Dad suggested. My sister wrinkled her nose. "The one who works at the supermarket? No, absolutely not. We can't have Marcus's family meeting people like that. This needs to be exclusive. Only successful relatives." They continued down the list, systematically excluding anyone who didn't meet their standards of success. Factory workers, teachers, retail workers, all crossed off without a second thought. I couldn't help myself. Maybe it was the absurdity of it all. Or maybe I just wanted to see what would happen. I let out a small laugh and said, "Well, I guess I shouldn't expect an invitation then. Travel company manager isn't exactly going to impress anyone." The room went quiet. Sarah looked up from her list, her perfectly manicured eyebrows drawing together in annoyance. She stared at me for a long moment, like she was just remembering I existed. "Well," she said slowly, clearly choosing her words, "I suppose you'll have to come. Marcus knows I have a sister, and it would look strange if you weren't there." She turned back to her list, adding with a sigh, "It would be awkward to explain your absence." I felt like I'd been slapped. Not because of what she said, I'd expected something like that from her, no. What hurt was watching Mom and Dad nodding along, like this was perfectly reasonable. Like their younger daughter being invited to her sister's engagement party, only to avoid awkwardness, was the most natural thing in the world. The date was set, 4 weeks until the engagement party. I made the conscious decision to skip my usual weekend visits to my parents' house during this time. Every time I called, all I could hear was chaos in the background. Mom arguing with caterers, Dad discussing wine selections, and my sister's voice rising above it all, directing everything like a conductor with an orchestra. 3 weeks into the preparation frenzy, my phone lit up with Sarah's name. It was the first time she'd called since the guest list discussion. "Hello?" I answered, wondering what criticism was coming my way this time. "Finally got my dress today," she announced without even a greeting. $5,000 custom made. Marcus's mother came with me to the boutique. She said, I look like a princess. I made a non-committal sound, something between and oh. "Listen." Her tone shifted to that familiar commanding one I'd grown up with. "You need to get yourself something decent to wear. And I mean decent, not your usual thrift store look." "My clothes are perfectly fine," I started to say. "No, they're not." She cut me off. "You look like a scarecrow most of the time. I'm not having you embarrass me at my engagement party. Get something appropriate. And for God's sake, do something with your hair for once." Before I could even respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, feeling the familiar mix of hurt and anger rising in my chest. But somewhere beneath that, a small voice whispered that maybe she had a point. When was the last time I'd really dressed up for anything? The next day, I took a half day off work and went shopping. I visited several stores before I found it, a deep emerald green dress that fell just below my knees. The color made my eyes look greener, and the cut actually gave me curves I didn't know I had. The saleswoman helped me find the perfect shoes to match, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely pretty when I looked in the mirror. Finally, the day of the engagement party arrived. I took extra care getting ready, even splurging on having my hair and makeup done at a salon. The stylist worked some kind of magic, transforming my usually straight hair into soft waves that framed my face perfectly. When I arrived at my parents' house, the place was transformed. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees and the front yard was filled with expensive cars I didn't recognize. Inside, the house was packed with people in designer clothes, all talking and laughing over the sound of classical music playing softly in the background. I scanned the crowd, looking for familiar faces. Most of the guests were clearly from Marcus's side. I could tell by their competent postures and expensive watches. Of our family, I only spotted Uncle Robert, who'd recently expanded his law firm to 3 states, and my cousins Michael and Rachel, the cardiac surgeon and the professor. They were huddled near the chocolate fountain, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Then Sarah made her grand entrance. She floated down the stairs in a dress that probably cost more than my car, all flowing white silk and delicate lace. But when she spotted me, her perfectly made-up face twisted into a grimace. She made a beeline straight for me, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Seriously?" she hissed through clenched teeth, looking me up and down. "That's what you chose to wear. You look like you're going to a mall, not an engagement party." I glanced down at my emerald dress, the one I'd felt so confident in just an hour ago. Before I could defend my choice, I heard a warm male voice behind us. "There's my beautiful fiancé." Marcus appeared with his parents in tow, him in a perfectly tailored suit, them looking like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. Sarah's transformation was instant and fascinating to watch. Like someone had flipped a switch, her face softened into a radiant smile, and her voice turned sweet as honey. "Darling," she cooed, wrapping herself around his arm. "I want you to meet someone very special." She turned to me, and I nearly choked on my own surprise as she continued. "This is my beloved sister, Amber. We're so close, aren't we, sweetie?" I had to resist the urge to check if there was another Amber behind me. Marcus's parents smiled warmly, his mother stepping forward to grasp my hands. "We've heard so much about you," she said kindly, though I seriously doubted that. I managed to mumble something polite while catching my sister's warning glare over their shoulders. The hypocrisy of it all made me want to scream, but I just smiled and nodded through their small talk. As the evening wore on, the noise and crowds started to get to me. The constant chatter, the clinking of glasses, the forced laughter at stories that weren't actually funny, it was all becoming too much. I'd done my duty, made an appearance, and now I just wanted the comfort of my quiet apartment. I made my way to the drink table, bypassing the champagne for a glass of pomegranate juice. Just one quick goodbye to my sister, I thought, and then I could escape. The juice was cool in my hand as I navigated through the crowd toward where she stood holding court with her future in-laws. I was almost there when it happened. Someone, I never saw who, bumped into me from behind. I stumbled forward, and everything seemed to move in slow motion. The juice left my glass in an elegant arc, sailing through the air like some terrible crimson comet, before splashing across Sarah's pristine white dress. The room fell silent. The red stain spread across the expensive fabric like a blooming flower, and I watched in horror as my sister's face went from shocked white to furious red. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, reaching for a napkin. "It was an accident, The slap came out of nowhere, the crack of it echoing in the silent room. My cheek burned as I stared at my sister, who stood trembling with rage, tears streaming down her face and ruining her perfect makeup. "You clumsy cow," she screamed, gesturing at her ruined dress. Get out of this house right now." I looked desperately toward my parents, hoping they'd step in, say something, anything. Mom caught my eye, but her face was hard and cold. "Leave immediately," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "You've ruined everything." Dad wouldn't even look at me. He stood there, staring at his shoes like they were the most interesting things in the world. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Sarah's ragged breathing and the quiet murmurs of the guests. I grabbed my purse with shaking hands and walked toward the door. Every step felt like walking through mud, every pair of eyes following me like spotlights. I could hear Marcus's mother saying something in a concerned voice, but I couldn't make out the words over the rushing sound in my ears. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember stopping at traffic lights or turning corners. Somehow, I made it back to my apartment, fumbled with my keys and got inside. Only then, in the safety of my own space, did I finally break down. I slid down against the door and let the tears come. They weren't quiet, dignified tears. They were ugly, gasping sobs that shook my whole body, the kind that leave you feeling hollow afterward. I cried for the humiliation, for the betrayal, for 25 years of being the family disappointment. The next morning I woke up with swollen eyes and a headache. When my phone rang and I saw Sarah's number, a tiny spark of hope flickered in my chest. Maybe she'd calm down. Maybe she was calling to apologize for slapping me in front of everyone. I should have known better. "You stupid, worthless." She launched into a tirade that would have made a sailor blush. I held the phone away from my ear as she unleashed a stream of profanity that would have gotten her kicked out of her modeling jobs if her clients had heard it. When she finally paused for breath, she snapped, "That dress cost $5,000, you clumsy idiot, and you're going to pay for it, plus $5,000 for emotional damages." Do you have any idea how humiliated I was? I sat there stunned by the audacity of it all. You want me to pay you $5,000 for emotional damages after you slapped me in front of everyone? You ruined my engagement party, she screeched. I'll pay for the dress, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That's fair. It was an accident, but I'll take responsibility for plus 5,000. No, I said, surprising myself with how firm my voice sounded. Actually, you know what? After the way you just spoke to me, after slapping me in public, I'm not paying for anything. I hadn't even put my phone down when it started ringing again. This time it was Mom's number lighting up the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I knew she'd just keep calling. Hello? I answered, already tired. Amber, Mom's voice was sharp, the way it used to get when I disappointed her as a child. You need to pay your sister for the dress and the emotional distress you caused her. You ruined her engagement party. I pressed my fingers against my temples, feeling a headache building. Mom, it was an accident. Someone bumped into me. And in case you forgot, she slapped me in front of everyone. Well, what did you expect? You ruined her $5,000 dress. You humiliated her at her engagement party in front of Marcus's entire family. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was for all of us? I felt something snap inside me. 25 years of swallowing my feelings, of accepting their treatment, of trying to be the good, understanding daughter. It all came pouring out. Embarrassing for you? My boy shook. What about how embarrassing it was for me to be slapped in front of a room full of strangers? What about how humiliating it is to have my own parents take her side after she physically assaulted me? Don't be dramatic. No, Mom, you and Dad should have stood up for me. You should have said something when she slapped me. You're my parents too, or have you forgotten that? There was a long pause, and when Mom spoke again, her voice was cold. Listen carefully, Amber. Either you pay your sister what she's asking for, or your father and I are done talking to you. It's your choice. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know what, Mom? That's not much of a threat anymore. I'm done. I'm done being the family punching bag. I'm done being compared to her. I'm done being treated like I'm worth less than her. Don't worry about not talking to me. I don't want to talk to any of you anymore. I hung up before she could respond, then turned off my phone. I needed a break from all of them. When I turned it back on an hour later, my screen was flooded with text messages from my sister. Each one was worse than the last. You're just jealous because you're a fat, ugly nobody. You've always been the family embarrassment. Can't even walk properly, you clumsy elephant. Don't worry about coming to the wedding, you're not invited anyway. Have fun in your sad little rented apartment while I live in luxury with Marcus. You'll die alone and poor while I'm living my best life in our mansion. Reading through my sister's endless stream of boasting about her future wealthy lifestyle, something inside me snapped. My fingers flew across the keyboard before I could stop myself. You mean the house that belongs to Marcus's parents? The one you'll be living in as a guest? There was a brief pause in her messages. The first silence in what felt like hours, then my phone exploded with new texts. You think you're so smart? She wrote. Those old fools won't know what hit them. Marcus's parents are complete idiots. New money without a clue how to protect it. Give me 6 months and I'll have them eating out of my hand. A year tops, and I'll get them to sign over everything. I stared at my phone in horror as the messages continued. Marcus is even dumber than they are. He actually believes I'm in love with him. Can you imagine, that boring, soft-hearted fool? But he's my ticket to the good life, so I'll play whatever role I need to. She followed this with several laughing emojis, then launched right back into her threats about the money I supposedly owed her. Don't forget, $10,000 by the end of the week, or else. And don't think I won't make your life hell if you don't pay up, you pathetic loser. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, thinking about Marcus's mother, how kind she'd been to me at the party, how she'd tried to make me feel welcome despite my sister's behavior. They deserved to know the truth. Before I could talk myself out of it, I opened my sister's social media profile and found Marcus's mother's account. My finger hovered over the message button for a moment before I pressed it. Mrs. Hamilton, I wrote, this is Amber, Sarah's sister from the engagement party. I feel I should introduce myself properly, given how chaotic things became that evening. Her response came surprisingly quickly. Amber, dear, I was hoping to hear from you. I'm so sorry about what happened at the party. I've had a stern talk with Sarah about her behavior. She feels terrible about slapping you and assured me she would call to apologize. Has she reached out yet? I actually laughed out loud at that. It was a bitter sound in my quiet apartment. Actually, Mrs. Hamilton, that's part of why I'm messaging you. My sister hasn't apologized. Instead, she's been demanding $10,000 from me, $5,000 for the dress, and $5,000 for what she calls emotional damages. That can't be right, she replied quickly. She told me she felt awful about her reaction and understood it was just an accident. My hands were steady now as I typed my response. I have proof of what she's really been saying, not just about the money, but about other things as well. Things you and your family should know before the wedding. I started taking screenshots. Every nasty message from my sister, every threat, every cruel comment about Marcus and his family. every boast about her plans to manipulate them out of their money. I sent them all, one after another, letting the truth speak for itself. The weekend after I sent those screenshots was eerily quiet. No messages from my sister, no calls from my parents. The silence felt like the calm before a storm, and I was right. Early Saturday morning, somebody started pounding on my apartment door. Through the peephole, I could see my sister, her face contorted with rage. "Open this door, you backstabbing snake," she screamed, loud enough for the whole floor to hear. "Open it right now." I stood firmly behind my locked door. "I'm not letting you in. Say what you need to say and leave. You ruined everything," she shrieked. "Marcus called off the wedding. His mother showed him those messages. You had no right to send them. You're nothing but a traitor." "I sent them because they deserve to know the truth," I replied calmly. "They needed to know who they were really dealing with." "You did this on purpose." She was practically hyperventilating now. "You sent those messages to his mother because you're jealous of me. You've always been jealous." "No," I said firmly. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. Those people deserve to know you were planning to steal from them. That you were mocking them and using their son." She let out a string of curses that probably scandalized my elderly neighbors. Then I heard her storm off down the hallway. Her final, "I'll make you pay for this," echoed up the stairwell. I had barely caught my breath when my phone rang. "Mom and Dad, right on cue. What have you done?" Mom's voice was shrill. "Your sister is devastated. You have to fix this immediately. Call Marcus's mother. Tell her you doctored those messages because you were jealous of your sister's happiness." I sank into my couch, suddenly feeling very tired. "I won't do that. The messages were real and you know it. Sister showed her true colors, and now she has to deal with the consequences." "You spiteful, envious girl," Mom spat. "We always knew you were jealous of your sister's success, but this is a new low." "I'm done," I said quietly. "I'm done with all of this. Don't call me again." I hung up and blocked their numbers. Over the next few days, I heard through my cousin Rachel that Marcus had not only called off the wedding but had ended things completely with my sister. Apparently, his mother had shown him and his father all the messages, including the ones where my sister called them idiots, and bragged about her plans to steal their money. Rachel told me my sister was staying with our parents, crying constantly, and telling anyone who would listen that I had destroyed her life out of jealousy. My parents were apparently backing her version of events, painting me as the vindictive younger sister who couldn't stand to see her sister happy. That was when I knew I had to make a clean break. I spent my lunch break the following Monday looking at apartment listings in a different part of the city, found a nice place, slightly bigger than my current apartment, in a neighborhood I'd always liked. I thought I'd feel sad, but instead, I felt peaceful. Some might call it revenge, but it wasn't. It was justice. And as I carried the last box into my new apartment, I knew I'd sleep soundly that night, and every night after, knowing I had chosen self-respect over toxic peace.